The Thanksgiving table had always been a battleground in the Mitchell family, but this year was different. I'd spent 3 hours arranging the silverware just right, positioning each name card with precision and making sure Dad's special bourbon was stocked. Everything had to be perfect. That's what happens when you've been away for 5 years and finally come home to Boston. You try too hard. "Sarah, honey, could you check if the rolls are burning?" Mom called from the living room where she was, entertaining my aunts with stories about her garden club. Her voice carried that familiar strain, the one that said she was barely holding it together. "On it," I replied, grateful for the momentary escape. The kitchen smelled like sage and childhood memories. I adjusted the oven temperature and leaned against the counter, breathing deeply. 5 years in Seattle building my architectural firm had changed me, but this house hadn't changed at all. Same faded curtains with the bluebird pattern, same chipped tile near the refrigerator that Dad had promised to fix next weekend for the past decade. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "How's it going? Family driving you crazy yet?" I smiled. My fiancée knew me too well. We'd met at a coffee shop in Seattle during a rainstorm. So cliché it was almost embarrassing, but our connection had been instant. He'd wanted to come with me to meet the family, but I'd insisted on doing this alone. Some wounds needed to be addressed without witnesses. "Sarah, the doorbell." Mom's voice again, higher pitched this time. I smoothed down my navy dress and headed for the door. Uncle Robert and his wife Linda stood on the porch with their twin sons, now somehow teenagers. Behind them was Aunt Catherine, Dad's sister, clutching what looked like a homemade pie and wearing her perpetual frown. "Look, who finally remembered she has family," Catherine said by way of greeting, air-kissing my cheek. "Good to see you too, Aunt Catherine," I replied, taking her coat. Her perfume was overwhelming, a cloud of expensive resentment. Within an hour, the house was filled with the cacophony of Mitchell family gatherings. Dad held court in his armchair, regaling everyone with stories about his hardware store. Mum fluttered between conversations, never staying long enough to get trapped in one. My younger brother Ryan had arrived late, as usual, bringing his newest girlfriend, a yoga instructor, whose name I couldn't remember. I was placing the last dish on the dining table when I noticed the envelope. Cream-colored, expensive-looking, with no name written on it. It sat propped against the centerpiece, partially hidden by the elaborate flower arrangement Mom had ordered. "What's this?" I asked, holding it up. The room went quiet, too quiet. "Where did you find that?" Dad asked, his voice suddenly sharp. "On the table. It wasn't here when I set it earlier." Mom stepped forward, her hand trembling slightly. "It's nothing, dear. Probably just a card someone brought." But her eyes told a different story. Fear flickered. "They're unmistakable and raw." "I'll just put it with the other gifts," I said, moving toward the sideboard. "No!" The word exploded from Dad with unexpected force. "Give it to me." Something in his tone made me hesitate. I looked around the room, taking in the expressions. Uncle Robert was suddenly very interested in his shoes. Aunt Catherine's thin lips had pressed into an even thinner line. Ryan looked confused. "What's going on?" I asked, my fingers tightening around the envelope. "Sarah, please," Mom whispered. "Not now." That's when I knew. Whatever was in this envelope was about me. The weight of 5 years of silence, of unanswered questions, seemed concentrated in this small paper rectangle. I slid my finger under the flap before anyone could stop me. Inside was a single sheet of expensive stationery. The handwriting was familiar, elegant cursive that slanted just slightly to the right. My grandmother's handwriting. She'd been dead for 3 years. The note was dated just weeks before her death, but had apparently been entrusted to someone with instructions about when to deliver it. As I began to read, my hands started to shake. "To my family, gathered here without me," it began. "There are secrets that rot the foundation of a home, lies that eat away at love until nothing remains but hollow pleasantries." I looked up. Every eye was on me, expressions ranging from confusion to horror. "Should I continue?" I asked, my voice unnaturally steady. Dad stood up. "This isn't the time. When is the time, Dad? It's been 5 years. I turned back to the letter and continued reading aloud. Sarah deserves to know the truth about her birth. The agreement we all made to protect Thomas's reputation was wrong. My granddaughter left because she sensed the lies, even if she couldn't name them. The room erupted into whispers. Mum pressed her hands to her mouth. What agreement? I demanded, looking from face to face. What truth about my birth? Aunt Catherine suddenly stood. This is exactly why Mother was losing her mind at the end, always stirring up trouble. Is that what this is about? I asked, the pieces starting to align in my mind. The family tension whenever my birth story came up, the strange gaps in the photo albums, the way certain relatives treated me differently than Ryan. Your father isn't Thomas, Mom said quietly, her eyes fixed on some middle distance. It was a different time. I was young and your biological father wasn't suitable. Dad, or Thomas, the man I'd always called Dad, remained silent, his face ashen. Not suitable, I repeated. What does that mean? He was from the wrong side of town, Aunt Catherine interjected with a sniff. A mechanic from East Boston with nothing to his name. Catherine, enough, Mum snapped, but it was too late. The room had fractured into chaos, accusations flying, old wounds reopening, and I stood in the center of it all. Grandmother's letter. Clutched in my hand, feeling like the ground beneath me had disappeared. His name, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. I want his name. Mom looked at Dad, at Thomas, with a silent plea. He nodded almost imperceptibly. Daniel, she said softly. Daniel Calloway. The name meant nothing to me, just syllables that somehow contained half of who I was. Is he still in Boston? My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Last I heard, Uncle Robert said carefully, he owns a restoration garage in Cambridge. Classic cars. I folded the letter and placed it back in its envelope with deliberate care. 5 years of distance from my family suddenly made sense. I'd always felt the undercurrent of something unspoken, some tension that flared whenever I asked too many questions about my childhood. I think, I said slowly, that I'll be staying at a hotel tonight. Sarah, please, Mom began, tears streaming down her face. We can explain. I'm sure you can, I replied, and I want to hear it. But not tonight. Tonight, I need to think. As I walked upstairs to pack an overnight bag, I heard the arguments explode behind me. Blame being assigned, decades old, resentment surfacing. My phone buzzed again, Jake checking in. I didn't know what to tell him. How do you text? Just found out my dad isn't my dad and my whole family has been lying to me for 30 years. In my childhood bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed myself to cry. Not just for the lies, but for the revelation that somehow explained the perpetual feeling of being slightly out of place in my own family, the black sheep who never quite belonged. And somewhere in Cambridge, a man named Daniel Calloway existed, oblivious to the fact that his daughter had just discovered his existence on Thanksgiving Day. The hotel room was sterile and anonymous, exactly what I needed. I sat cross-legged on the king-sized bed, laptop open, search results for Daniel Calloway Cambridge Restoration filling the screen. Calloway Classic Restorations had a simple website, dark blue background, vintage car silhouettes, and a phone number. The About page showed a man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and arms crossed over a work shirt with Dan embroidered on the pocket. He had my eyes, the unusual grey-green that had always been attributed to some distant Mitchell ancestor. I closed the laptop and lay back, staring at the ceiling. My phone had been buzzing all morning with texts and calls from family members. Mom had left 3 voicemails, each more tearful than the last. Ryan sent a simple message. I didn't know either. Call me when you're ready. Only Jake's messages brought any comfort. No platitudes, no pressure, just, I'm here when you need. Me and I love you no matter what. Around noon I finally replied to him, going to meet my biological father today, will call tonight. Love you. His response was immediate. Want me on the next flight out? I considered it, then declined. This was something I needed to do alone. After a shower and change of clothes, I drove my rental car to Cambridge. Calloway Classic Restorations was housed in a converted warehouse near the river. Through the large windows, I could see several vintage cars in various states of restoration. A bell jingled as I pushed open the door. "Be right with you," called a voice from beneath a gleaming blue Mustang. I stood awkwardly in the reception area, taking in the framed photographs of restored vehicles, the trophies from car shows, the comfortable leather chairs for waiting customers. It smelled of motor oil and polish. Not unpleasant, just unfamiliar. A man rolled out from under the car and stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. It was him, the man from the website, my biological father. "Can I help you?" he asked, friendly but professional. I'd rehearsed this moment in my mind a dozen times on the drive over, but now that it was happening, words failed me. "I'm Sarah," I finally managed. "Sarah Mitchell." He nodded politely, clearly not recognizing the name. "I'm here because—" I took a deep breath. "My mother is Elizabeth Mitchell, formerly Elizabeth Harrington." His hand, still clutching the rag, froze mid-motion. The color drained from his face. "Elizabeth's daughter," he repeated slowly. "Yes." "You're 30. 29 next month." Nodded, calculations clearly happening behind his eyes. "You'd better come into the office." I followed him through a door marked private into a small but tidy office. Certificates hung on the walls, a desk with neat stacks of paperwork, a framed photo of him with a woman approximately his age, both smiling on what looked like a hiking trail. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to a chair while taking the one behind the desk. "Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee?" "I'm fine," I said, though my throat felt like sandpaper. He studied me openly now, his eyes, my eyes, moving over my features. "You look like your mother," he finally said, "but that—" He gestured to my face. "That's my mother's chin." "So you knew?" I asked. "About me?" He sighed heavily. "I knew Elizabeth was pregnant when she broke things off. Her family made it very clear I wasn't welcome in her life or the baby's." He leaned forward. "I tried, Sarah. For the first year I tried to be part of your life. But Tom Mitchell was a powerful man in town back then, and the restraining order made it clear what would happen if I persisted." "Restraining order?" The surprises just kept coming. "Your grandfather claimed I was harassing the family." His mouth twisted. "All I did was send baby gifts and request photos." He paused. "How did you find out about me?" I explained about the letter, the Thanksgiving revelation. As I spoke, his expression darkened. 30 years, he said quietly when I finished. "They kept you from me for 30 years. Did you ever—" I hesitated, unsure how to phrase it. "Did you have other children?" He shook his head. "Never married. Never had more kids. This place has been my life." He gestured around the garage. "That and my sister's family. You have cousins, by the way. 3 of them." The idea of unknown cousins, more family I'd never met, was overwhelming. "Why are you here, Sarah?" he asked gently. "What do you want from me?" It was the question I'd been asking myself since reading the letter. What did I want? Validation? Connection? Answers? "I don't know," I admitted. "I just found out yesterday that the man I called Dad my whole life isn't biologically related to me, that my family kept this massive secret. I guess I wanted to see you for myself." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Well, now you've seen me. Old mechanic with grease under his fingernails, just like your family probably described." "They said you weren't suitable," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "To the Harringtons, nobody without a trust fund was suitable. Your mother and I, 'cause we were young, different worlds. Her family made sure she understood what she'd be giving up if she chose me. And she chose them. She chose security." He corrected. "Can't blame her for that. She was 22 and pregnant." We sat in silence for a moment. Outside I could hear the sounds of the garage, a radio playing classic rock, the clang of tools. "I have so many questions," I finally said. "I bet you do." He smiled, a real smile this time. "I've got time if you do." We ended up talking for hours. He ordered pizza and we ate it in the office while he told me about his childhood in East Boston, how he'd met my mother at a friend's party, their whirlwind romance, and the crushing end when her family intervened. "She loved you," he said firmly. "Never doubt that. Elizabeth had a core of steel under that polite exterior. She wouldn't have kept you if she didn't want you with every fiber of her being. Even though it meant marrying a man she didn't love, Tom was a good guy back then," Daniel said, surprising me. "Stable, dependable, her parents' choice but not a bad one, and I think they grew to love each other. That happens sometimes." As the afternoon stretched into evening, I learned that Daniel played guitar, loved hiking, and had a sweet tooth that matched my own. I discovered that my fascination with how things are built, which had led me to architecture, might have roots in his mechanical aptitude. "You got a picture?" he asked suddenly, "of your life in Seattle?" I pulled out my phone and showed him photos of my architectural projects, my apartment overlooking Puget Sound, and finally pictures of Jake. "Handsome guy," he commented. "He treats you right." "The best," I assured him. "We're getting married next spring." Something flickered in his eyes. Sadness, perhaps. Another milestone he would have missed. "I'd like to meet him someday," he said carefully, not pushing. The implication hung in the air. Would we have a relationship moving forward? Was this a one-time meeting, or the beginning of something? As if reading my thoughts, he added, "No pressure, Sarah. I've lived 30 years knowing I had a daughter out there. I can handle whatever you decide about where we go from here." I nodded, grateful for his understanding. I need time to process everything. My family, the Mitchells, they're a mess right now. "They've had 30 years to tell you the truth," he said, a hint of steel in his voice. "Their mess isn't your responsibility." It was nearly 9 when I finally stood to leave. Impulsively, I asked, Would you be willing to meet my fiancé? He's offering to fly out." Daniel's face lit up. "I'd be honored." At the door, awkwardness descended again. "Do you hug a father you just met? Shake his hand?" He solved the dilemma by gently squeezing my shoulder. "Take care of yourself, Sarah, and regardless of what you decide about me being in your life, I want you to know something." His voice roughened. "Not a day went by that I didn't think about you, wonder what you were like. Hope you were happy." Tears pricked my eyes. I am. "Then they did something right," he said softly. As I drove back to the hotel, the enormity of the day crashed over me. I had a different father, cousins I'd never met, a whole branch of my family tree that had been deliberately kept from me. In the hotel parking lot, I finally called Jake. His familiar voice was like a lifeline to normality. "Hey," I said, my voice cracking. "I met him." "How was it?" "Overwhelming. Good. Strange." I couldn't find the right words. "He's nothing like what they said. He seems like a good man." "Do you want me there?" Jake asked again. This time I said yes. Jake arrived the next morning, bleary-eyed from the red-eye flight, but solid and present in the way I needed most. He held me for a long time in the hotel room, not asking questions, just being there. "You smell like airport," I finally mumbled. Into his shoulder. He laughed. "I'll shower, then you can tell me everything." Over room service breakfast, I filled him in on the family drama and my meeting with Daniel. Jake listened intently, asking occasional questions, but mostly just letting me talk through the tangle of emotions. "What's your next move?" he asked, when I'd finished. "I need to talk to Mom," I said. "Really talk, without the whole family circus around us." He nodded. "And after that?" "Daniel wants to meet you. I thought maybe dinner tonight." Jake's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. "Whatever you need, babe." I called Mom and asked her to meet me at the hotel restaurant for lunch, alone. She arrived exactly on time, looking smaller somehow, her normally perfect appearance slightly frayed at the edges. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. "Sarah," she said, reaching for my hands across the table. "I'm so sorry." "I need to understand," I replied, not pulling away, but not returning her grip either. "Everything." She nodded, signaled the waiter for coffee, and began to talk. The story came out in pieces. Her wealthy Boston family, her rebellion in dating a grease monkey from East Boston, the pregnancy that had thrown her life into chaos. My father threatened to cut me off completely, she explained, her voice hollow with old pain. Not just financially, but from the family. I was young and terrified. So you just gave Daniel up? Agreed to marry Dad? Thomas instead? She winced at my correction. Thomas had been my friend for years. He knew about the pregnancy, knew about Daniel. He offered a solution that would keep you in my life. At the time, it seemed like the only way forward. Did you love him? Daniel? Mom's eyes grew distant, wildly. He was everything my family wasn't, real, unpolished, passionate about life. But love doesn't put food on the table or pay medical bills, she sighed. At least that's what I told myself. And the restraining order? Her head snapped up. What restraining order? Daniel said. Grandfather got a restraining order against him when he tried to be part of my life. Mom paled. I never knew about that, I swear, Sarah. My father told me Daniel had moved on, lost interest. I believed her. The look of genuine shock on her face couldn't be faked. Does Thomas know he's not my biological father? Of course, she said. He agreed to raise you as his own, and Sarah, he does love you. Biology doesn't change that. But lies do, I said quietly. 30 years of lies. She flinched. We convinced ourselves it was for your protection, that knowing would only hurt you. Her voice broke. I see now how wrong we were. We talked for nearly 2 hours. I learned how the family had closed ranks around the secret, how grandmother had been the only one to object to the deception, how Mom had lived in fear of the truth coming out and destroying the family she'd built. Are you going to see him? Again? Daniel? She asked as we prepared to leave. Yes, I said firmly. Jake and I are having dinner with him tonight. She nodded, resignation and something like relief in her expression. He was a good man, Sarah, despite what my family said. He still is, I replied. That evening, Jake and I met Daniel at a small Italian restaurant near the garage. I watched as the two most important men in my life sized each other up, then relaxed into conversation about Seattle, cars, and eventually me. She could take apart and reassemble her toy kitchen when she was 4, Mom had apparently told Daniel. I should have known then she had your mechanical mind. And now she designs buildings, Jake said proudly. She's brilliant at it. Daniel beamed, and I felt a strange warmth spread through me. This man, who was my father by blood but a stranger by experience, was genuinely proud of me. Over tiramisu, Daniel hesitantly brought up the wedding. I understand if there's no place for me, he said carefully, but I'd be honored to attend if you wanted. Jake looked at me, silently communicating that this was entirely my decision. Actually, I said slowly, the idea forming as I spoke, I've been thinking about that. The traditional father-daughter moments. Daniel nodded, his expression carefully neutral. I think, I continued, that both you and Thomas should share those moments, if you're both willing. Daniel's eyes widened. You'd want that, even after everything. Thomas raised me, I said. He's my dad, in all the ways that matter, day to day. But you're my father too, I don't want to choose. I don't want you to choose either, Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. I'd be honored to share those moments. That night, back at the hotel, Jake held me as I cried, not from sadness this time, but from the emotional overload of the past few days. What if Thomas refuses? I asked into the darkness. What if he can't accept Daniel being part of my life? Then that's his loss, Jake said simply. But give him a chance. People can surprise you. The next day I drove to my parents' house alone. Thomas, Dad, was in the backyard, methodically raking leaves into piles despite the cold. Can we talk? I asked from the patio door. He looked up, surprise and hope crossing his face. Sarah, you came back. We sat on the old garden bench, our breath making clouds in the November air. I met Daniel, I said, getting straight to the point. Dad nodded, his jaw tight. I assumed you would. He's not what I expected. What did you expect? I considered. This. Based on what Aunt Catherine said? Someone rough, uncultured. But he's not like that at all. Dad sighed heavily. The Harringtons painted him that way because it was easier than admitting their daughter had fallen in love with someone from the wrong social circle. Did you ever meet him? Before all this? He nodded. Once? When your mother was still deciding what to do? A faint smile crossed his lips. He threatened to break my nose if I ever made her unhappy. This surprised a laugh out of me. Did that make you want to raise his child? No, Dad admitted. What made me want to raise you was holding you the day you were born. You wrapped your tiny hand around my finger and that was it. Biology be damned. Tears pricked my eyes. Why didn't you ever tell me? Fear, he said simply. Fear that you'd look at me differently, that you'd want him instead, that the family we'd built would crumble. He looked at me directly. It was selfish, I see that now. We sat in silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of leaves skittering across the lawn the only noise. I want you both at my wedding, I finally said. I want you both to walk me down the aisle. His head jerked up. Both? You raised me. You're my dad in every way that matters. But Daniel is part of who I am too. I took his hand, the same hand I'd apparently held as a newborn. I'm not choosing between you, I'm choosing both. For a moment he said nothing. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. If that's what you want. It is. Another silence fell between us, but different this time. Less strained, more thoughtful. Your grandmother, he said eventually, she never approved of the deception. Every family gathering, she'd pull me aside and tell me it wasn't too late to tell you the truth. A sad smile crossed his face. Looks like she found a way to have the last word. 6 months later, I stood in the bridal suite of a Seattle hotel, my wedding dress finally perfect after months of fittings. Mom fussed with my veil while my bridesmaids popped champagne. A knock at the door revealed both my fathers, Thomas in a classic black tux, Daniel in a navy suit that matched his garage's logo. They stood somewhat awkwardly together, these men from different worlds united by their connection to me. It's time, the wedding planner announced. In the hallway before the doors to the ceremony, I took a deep breath and placed one hand on each of their arms. Ready? I asked. They exchanged a look over my head, some silent male communication I couldn't interpret, and then both nodded. We are if you are, Thomas said. Absolutely, Daniel agreed. As the doors opened and the music swelled, I walked forward with my fathers, one who had raised me and one who had missed me, toward Jake and our future. The weight of secrets had been lifted, replaced by something new and undefined but full of possibility. The note that had shattered my world at Thanksgiving had led me here, to a more complicated family, yes, but also to a more honest one, to a story that was still being written, with chapters I never knew existed and others yet to unfold. And, as I moved down the aisle surrounded by those I loved most in the world, I realized that sometimes the most painful truths lead to the most beautiful beginnings.